All right, let's do this, yo. Remember, here's what you have to know. You have a 30, 60, 90 triangle, which you can recognize by the 30 degrees and the 60 degrees. There's a hypotenuse, there's a short leg and a long leg. Everything goes through the short leg. The magic numbers are 2 and square root 3. To go from the short leg and the long leg, or long leg, short leg, to go between them, you'll multiply or divide by the square root of 3. Short leg and hypotenuse, the number is 2. Multiply to go to the shorter thing to the bigger thing, divide to go from the bigger thing to the smaller thing. And then 45, 45, 90 triangle, the legs are the same, they are equal. The magic number is square root 2. To go from the hypotenuse to the leg, you divide by square root of 2, leg by hypotenuse, multiply by the square root of 2. That, what I just said, is the process for every single one of these. So let's go. Number 1. What is the hypotenuse? Y is the hypotenuse. 8 over here is the leg of this 45, 45, 90. So the legs are equal. So x equals 8. And then how do you go from the leg, which is 8, to the hypotenuse? We will multiply by the square root of 2. So it's y equals 8 times square root of 2, which of course just becomes 8 square root 2. On the next one, 45, 45, 90. This leg here is square root 2. It's the leg because the hypotenuse is this guy, 45, 45, 90. And the legs are the two things that make up the 90-degree angle. So both of the legs are equal to square root 2. Then how do you get the hypotenuse? How do you get the y equals 2? Well, I'm going to take that square root 2 and going to the shorter thing to the smaller thing, I multiply by the magic number, which is square root 2. So y equals the square root 2 times the square root 2. Same thing as square root 2 squared, it's 2. Okay? On this guy right here, on this 45, 45, 90, this leg here is 60 degrees. The hypotenuse is y. So how will I go from the hypotenuse, from the leg to the hypotenuse? Smaller thing to bigger thing, multiply by the magic number, which of course is square root 2. On this one, it gave us the 15 square root 2 is the hypotenuse of this 45, 45, 90 triangle. So both x and y are going to be equal, those legs. I'm going to go from going from a longer thing to a shorter thing, so I'm going to divide by the magic number, which is square root 2. So 15 square root 2 divided by square root 2, the square root 2's cancel out, and you're just left with 15. On number 5, I'm also given the hypotenuse. This time the hypotenuse is 8. 45, 45, 90 to go from the hypotenuse, which is 8, to the leg, which is x. I'm going to divide by the magic number, square root 2. 8 divided by square root 2. We have to simplify this, square root of 2 over the square root of 2 to multiply. We get 8 square root 2 over 2, which reduces a little bit, 4 square root 2. So this one took more work in the simplification, but the process of it was the same. 8 divided by square root 2. I just had to do some things to simplify to get that x was 4 square root 2. Number 6, the hypotenuse is the 9 square root 2, so I'm going to divide it by the square root of 2 to get to the leg. This is every time, the key is that seeing the 45-degree angle there is the key. So 9 square root 2 divided by square root 2 equals 9. Number 7 here, this square root 6 is the hypotenuse. So to go from the hypotenuse to the leg, I divide by square root 2. 6 square root 2 divided by square root 2, 6 square root 6 divided by square root 2. Because both those numbers are inside the radical, I just get square root 3. On number 8, this time it gives us the hypotenuse of 12. The process still is to go from the longer thing to the shorter thing. You divide. In this case, my magic number is square root 2. So 12 divided by the square root 2. You can't have the square at the bottom, so I multiply by square root 2 over the square root 2 to get 12 square root 2 divided by 2. Now the 12 over 2 will simplify. 12 over 2 is 6. The answer is 6 square root 2. Finally, number 9. Do you notice it doesn't show you 45 degrees here? However, it's isosceles because both of those guys are square root 5. So an isosceles right triangle, these two angles have to be congruent, so they have to be 45 degrees. An isosceles triangle gets, so it's still a 45, 45, 90 triangle. An isosceles right triangle is a 45, 45, 90. The Square root 5 are the legs. To get to the hypotenuse, you multiply by the square root of 2. Square root 5 times the square root of 2 is square root 10. So on 45, 45, 90, the legs are equal. You multiply the square root of 2 to go from the leg to the hypotenuse, divide by the square root of 2 to go from the hypotenuse to the leg. I'm going to jump down to the next piece of these are mostly 30, 60, 90 triangles. I will always go from the short leg, but here's what you got to know with the square root 3 and 2. Let's go do it. On number 15 here, it's a 30, 60, 90 triangle. X is the hypotenuse. You already had some of those answers. X is the hypotenuse. Y is opposite the 60-degree angle. It's the long leg, and then therefore 12 here is the short leg. I will always go from the short leg to the hypotenuse by multiplying by 2. So 12 times 2 is 24. And then 12 times the square root of 3 is where the 12 square root 3 comes from. On the next one, I got the sides are, I have the short leg is here, opposite the 30-degree angle. The long leg is opposite the 60-degree angle. The hypotenuse is opposite the hypotenuse. Identifying those things, which ones are the short leg, long leg, and hypotenuse, is pretty key. In this case, it starts with the long leg as 2 square root 3. You always go, whether it gives you the long leg or the hypotenuse, you have to go to the short leg. So I'm going to divide bigger thing to smaller thing by what number? Long leg, short leg number is square root 3. So 2 square root 3 divided by square root 3 gets you 2. And then hypotenuse to short leg to hypotenuse will multiply by 2. And of course 2 times 2 is 4. And the next one of my pieces and parts, opposite the 90-degree angle is the hypotenuse. Opposite the 30-degree angle is the short leg. And that makes this the long leg. It's the opposite 60 degrees. It gives us the short leg. So that's what I need to find the long leg and the short leg. I'll multiply by the square root of 3 to get the long leg. I will multiply 2 square root 3 by 2 to get the hypotenuse. So x equals 2 square root 3 times 2. Multiply the numbers that are not inside the radical together to get me 4 square root 3. And then y is going to equal 2 square root 3 times the square root of 3. The square root of 3 times the square root of 3 is 3. So I get 2 times 3 is 6 is where that comes from. On the next one, y is the hypotenuse opposite the right angle. 9 square root 3 is the long leg opposite 60 degrees. So I'm going to go from the long leg to the short leg by dividing by the square root of 3. 9 square root 3 divided by the square root of 3. Those guys cancel out, and we're just left with 9. And then now that I have the short leg is 9, 9 times 2 gets you the hypotenuse. 9 times 2, of course, is 18. On the next one, the hypotenuse is y. 9 is the long leg, and the short leg is x. So Dave started off with a long leg. We always go to the short leg. In this case, the magic number is square root 3. We will divide by the square root 3. 9 divided by the square root 3 gets you 9 square root 3 over 3. 9 divided by the square root of 3. We have to multiply by the square root of 3 over the square root of 3. Gets us the 9 square root of 3 over 3. The 9 over 3 then finally reduces to get 3 square root 3. Now that I have the short leg, I multiply by 2. 3 square root 3 times 2 gets you 6 square root 3. The 3 multiplies with that 2 not inside the radical. Number 20 here, the hypotenuse is y. The short leg is x. The long leg is 15. Long leg to short leg, divide by the square root of 3. Similar process as the ones we just saw, so that's where the x gets 5 square root 3 from the simplification process. And then multiply by 2. The number 5 will be multiplied by 2, but not the square root of 3, is where the 10 square root 3 comes from. Now, I hope you recognize these as, just like the Pythagorean theorem questions that we did, these are like the buy one, get one. These are just have a triangle on the left, triangle on the right, for each of these three. And I hope you also recognize these as similar questions. So this one is a 45, 45, 90 on the left. The hypotenuse is given as 7 square root 2. So I need to solve the triangle on the left first. The hypotenuse is 7 square root 2. Well, we'll divide by square root 2 to go from the hypotenuse to the leg. From there, I get that C is 7. Well, so is A, right? Because it's isosceles. The A and the legs are the same. Now, A is in the triangle on the right, which is a 30, 60, 90 triangle, and that's the short leg. So I will go from the short leg to the hypotenuse. B is the hypotenuse, and D is the long leg. So short leg to hypotenuse, I'll multiply by 2. 7 times 2 is 14. Short leg to long leg, multiply by the square root of 3. 7 square root 3. On the next one, the triangle on the left with the side that's given, 4 square root 3 is the hypotenuse of a 30, 60, 90 triangle. C is the short leg. So I will take the hypotenuse and divide by 2. 4 square root 3 divided by 2 is 2 square root 3. Then I will multiply by the square root of 3 to get the square root 6. 2 square root 3 times the square root of 3. I think we saw this earlier in the page. Square root of 3 times square root of 3 is 3, so 2 times 3 is 6 is where that comes from. Now, the triangle on the right is a 45, 45, 90. The legs are the same, so once I figured out that A is 6, I know that D is 6. And then to get what B is, I go from the leg to the hypotenuse, multiply by the square root of 2, 6 square root 2. Same drill over here. I got a 30, 60, 90 triangle on the left and a 30, 60, 90 triangle on the right. 10 is my length that's given. So 10 is the hypotenuse of this 30, 60, 90 triangle. The short leg is D, so 10 divided by 2 is 5, is where that comes from. Now, 5 times the square root of 3 gets me the long leg from the short leg. 5 times the square root of 3, of course, is simply 5 square root of 3. Now, 5 square root of 3 is the short leg of the triangle on the left. So B changes its roles. It's now the short leg. To go from the short leg to the hypotenuse, we multiply by what magic number? That's right, it's 2. So 5 square root 3 times 2 gets you 10 square root 3. And then to get C, we will multiply 5 square root 3 times the square root 3, which simplifies and becomes 15. Okay, finally, these 3 questions. You should recognize the half of the rectangles, which means we're going to turn that into a rectangle and a right triangle. This time, it's a 30, 60, 90, so we get to use our magic numbers. The sides of the rectangle, 2 square root 3 comes over. I don't know what B is yet, but let's solve this. Now that I know one side of this 30, 60, 90 triangle, let's solve it, meaning figure out what all its sides are. This is the long leg now, opposite the 60-degree angle of this 30, 60, 90 triangle that I've highlighted in yellow. I will go from the long leg to the short leg. How do we do that? Dividing by the square root 3. 2 square root 3 divided by the square root 3 gets you 2. Okay? So that means if this whole piece was 6, my green part here is 2, the short leg of the triangle, then the other part of the rectangle over there is 4, which means the opposite side of the rectangle is also 4, which is what B is. And then short leg to hypotenuse, we multiply by 2, so 2 times 2 is 4. Same story, different verse here on the next one, right triangle with a rectangle. Now it's a 45, 45, 90 triangle. The hypotenuse is 3 square root 2. We will always divide by the square root of 2 to get the leg, which is in this case 3, which then means if that's 3, this is also 3. So I solve for the triangle. And it's a 45, 45, 90, right? So my leg down here of the 45, 90 is also 3. This bottom part of the rectangle is 4, so B is the combination of 3 plus 4, which is 7. Right triangle, rectangle, 45, 45, 90, where B is my hypotenuse. The rectangle, I get 6 on this side of the rectangle, which also happens to be a leg of my 45, 45, 90. Well then, so my hypotenuse is going to be 6 times the square root of 2. The other leg is 6. The other rectangle part comes down, that gets 8. So A equals 8 plus 6, or 14. I'll be excited to answer your questions when you have them, or give me a shout out. But I hope that was helpful. Y'all be good. Stay safe.